A single strike has shaken Moscow's confidence. Flamingo missiles destroyed the Shatura power grid, plunging the region into blackout chaos and crippling an $800 million energy hub. Here's how Ukraine executed one of the most precise and damaging attacks of the war. The night sky over Shatura, a quiet industrial backbone just 75 miles east of the Kremlin, did not flicker with the usual hum of sodium streetlights on the evening of November 23, 2025. Instead, it erupted. The silence of the Moscow Oblast was shattered not by the low drone of a Shahed loitering munition, but by the supersonic arrival of a new reality. A reality forged in Ukrainian factories and delivered with devastating precision. This was the moment the illusion of Moscow's invulnerability evaporated, incinerated in the fireball of the Shatura thermal power station. For nearly 4 years, the Russian capital had existed in a bubble of relative normalcy, insulated from the freezing darkness that its military had systematically imposed on Kharkiv and Kiev. That insulation is gone. The strike on the Shatura energy node was not merely a tactical success, it was a strategic declaration. Ukraine has not only bridged the technological gap, but has leapfrogged into a dominance that leaves the Kremlin's most expensive air defense networks scrambling against ghosts. At the center of this paradigm shift sits a weapon that Western analysts are only beginning to understand, and Russian radar operators are learning to fear: the FP-5 Flamingo. To understand the magnitude of this event, one must look beyond the immediate smoke rising from the twisted turbines of the Shatura plant. We are witnessing the dismantling of an energy empire valued at hundreds of millions of dollars. A grid architecture designed during the Soviet zenith to be indestructible, now exposed as fragile and antiquated. The target selection was impeccable. The Shatura GRES-5 is not just a power station. It is a critical artery in the Moscow energy ring, a facility with a historical lineage dating back to the Lenin electrification plants, modernized to feed the insatiable demand of the capital's eastern expanse. When the warhead struck, they did not just sever cables, they severed the social contract between the Russian state and its protected core citizenry. The narrative of the special military operation being a distant frontier conflict collapsed the moment the heating systems failed in the upscale suburbs of Moscow. This is the story of how a dominant Ukraine, leveraging indigenous innovation and ruthless strategic planning, turned the tables in the energy war, leaving the Kremlin staring into the dark. The instrument of this devastation, the Flamingo missile, represents a triumph of necessity over bureaucracy. While the world watched the slow deliberations over permissions to use Western Storm Shadows and ATAC-MS deep inside Russia, Ukraine's defense sector, specifically the WHO startup entity Firepoint, was quietly engineering a solution that required no foreign permission slips. The FP-5 Flamingo is a ground-launched cruise missile that defies the conventional limitations of a nation under siege. With a reported range extending up to 3,000 kilometers and a warhead payload of 1,000 kilograms, it is a beast of a different nature than the modified drones that characterized earlier Ukrainian deep strikes. Drones are harassment. The Flamingo is a siege breaker. The strike on Shatura demonstrated a capability that few believed Ukraine possessed: the ability to deliver heavy ordnance through the densest air defense zone on the planet. The S-400 battalions ringing Moscow, the Pantsir systems atop government buildings, and the layered electronic warfare jams proved impotent against a missile designed specifically to exploit their blind spots. The engagement began long before the explosions were heard, in the posh districts of the Moscow region. It started with intelligence. The identification of the Shatura plant's weak points, specifically the high-pressure turbine halls and the main transformer yards, suggests a level of intelligence penetration that should terrify the Russian General Staff. Ukraine did not simply aim for the building. They aimed for the jugular of the facility's operational capacity. The strike package likely utilized a complex mix of decoys and electronic warfare drones to light up Russian radars, forcing the air defense batteries to commit their interceptors to cheap, expendable targets. Once the expensive S-400 missiles were depleted or the radar arrays were saturated with false signatures, the Flamingos entered the kill box. Moving at high subsonic speeds and hugging the terrain to mask their approach, these missiles delivered a kinetic punch that turned an $800 million asset into a liability of twisted metal and burning oil. The immediate aftermath in Shatura was chaotic, a microcosm of the broader panic spreading through the Russian administrative apparatus. Local social media channels, usually heavily censored, flooded with videos of a sky turned apocalyptic orange. The official narrative tried to contain the damage, with Governor Andrei Vorobyov issuing standard statements about falling debris and controlled fires. But the reality was undeniable to the thousands of residents watching their breath fog in their freezing living rooms. The physics of power generation do not lie. When a 1-ton warhead detonates inside a turbine hall, there is no debris damage. There is total structural failure. The grid, sensing the catastrophic loss of generation, likely attempted to reroute power, causing voltage spikes and cascading trips in substations miles away. This is the Moscow blackout chaos that headlines fail to fully capture. It is not just the lights going out. It is the realization that the infrastructure sustaining modern life is defenseless. This strike dismantles the psychological fortress Putin has built around his war. The Russian population has largely been passive, bought off with high wages in the defense sector and the illusion of stability in the cities. The Shatura strike pierces that veil. When the heating stops in November, when the elevators in high-rise apartments freeze between floors, when the metro systems face brownouts, the abstract concept of victory clashes with the visceral reality of survival. Ukraine has effectively brought the war home, not with terrorist attacks on civilians, but with precise, legitimate military strikes on the dual-use infrastructure that powers the Russian war machine. By targeting the energy sector, Ukraine is forcing the Kremlin into a dilemma it cannot solve. Pull air defenses from the front lines in the Donbass to protect Moscow's utilities, or leave the capital exposed and risk domestic unrest. It is a classic fork, a chess move where every option leads to a loss of position. The financial dimension of this attack is equally staggering. The $800 million figure attached to the devastation is a conservative estimate when one considers not just the replacement cost of the unique, high-voltage equipment, but the economic loss of the downtime. These turbines are not off-the-shelf components. They are often Western-built legacy systems from the pre-sanctions era, or complex Russian replacements that take years to manufacture. By destroying them, Ukraine has inflicted a wound that cannot be stitched up with oil revenue. You cannot buy a new Siemens turbine with rubles when you are under total sanctions. You cannot 3D print a massive power transformer overnight. The Shatura plant is now a crime scene of economic warfare, a testament to the fact that Russia's industrial base is being ground down faster than it can be replenished. The Flamingo missile cost a fraction of the damage it inflicted, representing an asymmetric return on investment that no Russian oil field can offset. We must also consider the technological dominance displayed by the Ukrainian guidance systems. The Flamingo does not rely solely on GPS, which is heavily jammed over Western Russia. Reports indicate it utilizes a form of terrain contour, matching, and optical scene correlation, technologies that allow the missile to see its path and correct its course without external signals. This autonomy is what makes it so dangerous to the Russian rear. It operates in a radio-silent bubble, immune to the frantic jamming signals blasting from Russian electronic warfare trucks. The fact that these missiles navigated the air defense corridors of the Moscow Oblast undetected until the terminal phase speaks to a sophistication in mission planning that rivals the best NATO standards. Ukraine has evolved from a Soviet legacy army into a premier practitioner of 21st century precision warfare, and the Flamingo is their flagship. The reaction from the Russian Ministry of Defense was telling in its incoherence. Claims of shooting down dozens of drones, while the Shatura plant burned in the background, only served to erode credibility further. The disconnect between the state media's "all is calm" narrative and the reality of a burning horizon creates a cognitive dissonance in the Russian populace. This dissonance is a weapon in itself. It breeds distrust, fear, and rumors. It makes every power flicker a source of panic. It turns the winter, traditionally Russia's greatest ally in warfare, into its most treacherous enemy. Ukraine, having endured the energy terror of the previous winters, has now reversed the polarity of the conflict. They have proven that they can freeze Moscow just as easily as Moscow tried to freeze Kiev. Furthermore, the strategic timing cannot be overlooked. As winter sets in, the demand on the Russian energy grid peaks. The system runs with lower margins of error. By striking now, Ukraine maximizes the impact of the damage. A power plant lost in July is an inconvenience. A power plant lost in late November is a crisis. The freezing temperatures amplify the misery and the urgency. Pipes burst, industrial processes halt, and the logistical chains that rely on rail transport, which in Russia is heavily electrified, begin to snarl. The Shatura line feeds into the rail networks moving east of Moscow, potentially disrupting the flow of war material heading to the front. Every Flamingo that hits a transformer in the Moscow region is effectively delaying a trainload of ammunition destined for the Donbass. The success of the Flamingo program also highlights the resilience and ingenuity of the Ukrainian defense industry. While Firepoint, the manufacturer, has faced its share of scrutiny and growing pains, typical of any wartime startup scaling at breakneck speed, the results on the ground silence the critics. They have managed to scale production under constant bombardment, disperse their manufacturing to hidden locations, and deliver a finished product that changes the strategic calculus of the war. This is the industrial might of a free people defending their existence, contrasted against the lumbering, corrupt state-owned enterprises of the Russian Federation. The Flamingo is not just a missile, it is a symbol of Ukrainian sovereignty and the refusal to be a victim. There is also the geopolitical signal sent by this strike. For months, Western capitals have wringed their hands over escalation, holding back long-range fires to avoid provoking Putin. Ukraine, by using its own domestic weapons to strike deeper and harder than any Western missile was allowed to, has rendered that hesitation moot. They have demonstrated that the red lines of the Kremlin are drawn in disappearing ink. Moscow was struck, its power grid ravaged, and the nuclear apocalypse did not follow. Instead, the Russian military looked weak, confused, and unable to defend its own capital. This emboldens Ukraine's allies and demoralizes its enemies. It proves that the path to peace is not through restraint, but through dominance. When Russia feels the cost of war in its own homes, in its own dark, freezing apartments, only then will the calculus for peace negotiation become real for the aggressor. The Moscow blackout chaos is not a singular event, but a preview of a campaign. If Shatura can be hit, so can the other major generating stations ringing the capital. The Kashira power plant, the Konakovo power station, the substations feeding the Kremlin itself, all are now within the proven reach of the Flamingo. The energy empire that Putin uses as a geopolitical bludgeon is being dismantled piece by piece. The revenue generated by oil and gas means nothing if the electricity required to refine it, transport it, and use it is cut off. Ukraine is effectively enforcing a physical sanction on the Russian economy, one that cannot be bypassed by shadow fleets or friendly banks in neutral countries. You cannot bypass a destroyed transformer. Moreover, the strike exposes the hollowness of the Russian air defense myth. The S-400 Triumph has been marketed globally as the ultimate shield, a system capable of engaging targets from space to the treetops. Yet, a subsonic cruise missile, likely built with components available on the commercial market and integrated by Ukrainian engineers, penetrated the heart of this shield. This failure will have repercussions in the global arms market. India, Turkey, and other operators of Russian air defense systems are watching closely. If the S-400 cannot protect Moscow from the Flamingo, what good is it? Ukraine is not just destroying Russian infrastructure. They are destroying the brand reputation of the Russian military-industrial complex, costing Moscow billions in future arms sales. The silence in the Kremlin regarding the true extent of the damage is deafening. They cannot admit that a Ukrainian missile devastated a strategic asset without admitting their own incompetence. So they lie. They blame drones. They blame accidents. They minimize the impact. But the satellite imagery, widely available to the world, tells the truth. The scorch marks on the Shatura complex are visible from space. The heat signatures picked up by NASA's firm's data show the intensity of the fires. The world sees a Russia that is naked, its defenses stripped away, its energy heart exposed. Ukraine, the supposed underdog, is dictating the tempo of the strategic air campaign. As we analyze the specific technical aspects of the Flamingo's success, the warhead design deserves attention. A 1-ton payload is massive for a cruise missile of this class. It implies that the Flamingo is not just a repurposed drone, but a dedicated heavy strike platform. The damage mechanism was likely a delayed fuse, allowing the missile to punch through the roof of the turbine hull before detonating inside. This creates a containment effect, amplifying the blast wave and ensuring the total destruction of the delicate machinery within. The resulting fire, fed by the high-pressure oil used in the turbines, would be nearly impossible to extinguish quickly. This is professional demolition work delivered by aerospace engineering. The social impact in Shatura and the surrounding districts was immediate. Reports of residents fleeing to dachas with wood stoves, stripping the shelves of bottled water and batteries, paint a picture of a society that has suddenly realized its fragility. The social contract in Russia is based on a trade, political passivity for stability and basic services. Ukraine has broken that trade. If the state cannot provide heat and light, the legitimacy of the regime begins to fracture. The chaos is not just in the grid. It is in the minds of the people who realized that the war is no longer something they can watch on TV. It is something that is happening to them. This dominance extends to the information space. Ukraine's ability to execute such a strike, and then let the Russian silence speak for itself, is a masterclass in information warfare. They do not need to boast. The darkness in Moscow speaks for them. The rumors swirling in Russian telegram channels are far more damaging than any official Ukrainian press release. Panic feeds on uncertainty, and by striking deep and hard, Ukraine generates maximum uncertainty. Is my city next? Is the metro safe? Will the power be back on before the pipes burst? These are the questions haunting the Russian public, questions that Putin cannot answer. The Shatura strike also serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of centralized systems. The Soviet grid was designed for efficiency and central control, which makes it robust against some failures, but catastrophic when key nodes are taken out. Ukraine, having operated a similar grid, knows exactly where these nodes are. They know the schematics, the backups, and the bottlenecks. They are fighting an enemy they understand intimately. This insider knowledge, weaponized through the Flamingo missile, allows for a surgical dismantling of the Russian state's capacity to function. We are seeing a dominant Ukraine that has moved beyond survival mode into a phase of punitive strategic operations. The narrative that Russia has infinite resources and Ukraine is running on fumes is being rewritten. Russia's resources are vast, but fixed and vulnerable. Ukraine's resources are evolving, adaptive, and increasingly capable of striking the enemy where it hurts most. The energy empire is being revealed as a glass giant, impressive to look at, but shattering under the right frequency of impact. The Flamingo missile is likely just the vanguard of a new generation of Ukrainian long-range weapons. If the FP5 is already in serial production and capable of this level of destruction, one must wonder what else is in the development pipeline. Ballistic missiles? Hypersonic gliders? The trajectory of Ukrainian innovation suggests that the threat to Russia will only grow in complexity and lethality. The window for Russia to force a favorable conclusion to the war is closing, slammed shut by the capabilities of the Ukrainian defense industry. In the days following the strike, the repair crews at Shatura would be facing a nightmare. The specialized equipment needed to replace the destroyed units is likely sanctioned. The expertise to install it is stretched thin across a country dealing with a degrading infrastructure. The power deficit will have to be managed by rolling blackouts or by straining other, older plants to their breaking point, increasing the risk of accidents. Ukraine has effectively initiated a chain reaction of degradation within the Russian energy sector. The international community must recognize this shift. The narrative of a stalemate is false. A stalemate implies a static line of contact. What we are seeing is a dynamic, deep battle campaign where one side is systematically eroding the other's strategic depth. Ukraine is winning the war of the rear areas. They are making the Russian homeland a battle space, and they are doing it with a dominance that belies the disparity in size between the two nations. As the winter deepens, the fires of Shatura will serve as a beacon. For Ukraine, a beacon of hope and capability. For Russia, a beacon of warning. The blackout in Moscow is not just an absence of light. It is the presence of a new strategic reality. The Flamingo has flown, and the energy empire is shattering. The $800 million empire of the Shatura grid is now a smoking ruin, a testament to the fact that in modern war, there is no sanctuary. The chaos is here, and it was delivered by a blue and yellow missile that no Russian radar saw coming until it was too late. This is the state of the war in late 2025. A dominant Ukraine, armed with the Flamingo, striking at the heart of the aggressor, turning the lights out on the Kremlin's ambitions. The message is clear. The war will end when Russia withdraws, or when Russia goes dark. There is no third option. The Shatura strike is the proof. The implications for the broader European security architecture are profound. Ukraine has demonstrated that it can act as the shield of Europe, not just by absorbing blows, but by neutralizing threats at their source. A Ukraine capable of striking Moscow is a Ukraine that guarantees the security of Warsaw, Berlin, and Paris. The Flamingo missile is not just a tool of war, it is a tool of deterrence. It shifts the balance of power in Eastern Europe decisively. The Russian bear has been poked, and it has been found to be slow, blind, and vulnerable. As we look at the specific targeting data again, the precision becomes even more impressive. To hit a specific turbine hall in a sprawling industrial complex requires a circular error probable, CEP, of less than 10 meters. The Flamingo achieved this after flying hundreds of kilometers. This level of precision was previously the domain of the US Tomahawk or the Russian Caliber. Now, it is the domain of the Ukrainian Flamingo. The democratization of precision strike capability is a nightmare for authoritarian regimes that rely on mass and size for security. Size no longer matters when the enemy can put a 1-ton warhead through your ventilation shaft. The blackout also disrupts the digital life of the capital. Server farms, communication nodes, and banking systems all rely on stable power. The flicker in Shatura causes data packet loss in Moscow. It slows down financial transactions. It disrupts the surveillance state. The chaos is digital as well as physical. In a regime that relies on total control of information, a power outage is a blinding event. For a few hours, the eye of Sauron blinked, and in that blink, the people of Moscow saw the truth. This event will be studied in military academies for decades. It will be the case study of how a smaller, more innovative nation can degrade the strategic infrastructure of a nuclear superpower using conventional means. It marks the end of the era where nuclear states could wage conventional wars with impunity. The Flamingo has rewritten the rules of engagement. The cost to repair the Shatura facility will likely exceed the estimated $800 million when one accounts for the corruption, the sanctions, and the rush fees. But the cost to Putin's prestige is incalculable. He promised security. He delivered a burning power plant and a freezing capital. The dominant Ukraine narrative is not propaganda. It is an observation of facts on the ground. The skies over Russia are no longer Russian. They are contested. And in the case of the Shatura strike, they were Ukrainian. Thanks for watching. For more updates on how this war is evolving in real time, don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications. There's much more to uncover.